Greetings once again. Gentleman Jim McFarland, the tailor.
And I'm Victoria Baylor, professional dressmaker. And this is our show, The Tailor and the Dressmaker. We're dedicating this show to, of course, bringing you exciting sewing information laced with a touch of inspiration and lots of thoughtfulness. So this week we're going to have a really exciting show. First off, we just want to thank everybody.
Thank you.
Right, Mr. Jim, just thank you so much for the great reception for our first show.
Thank you.
We're super overwhelmed just by all your kind compliments, for you guys tuning in and not considering it robbery to just listen and view and just be inspired. So we're really thankful for that. So with that kind of ammunition, we feel the charge to go on and just go hard with this next show, covering some really deep, detailed, fundamental information about how to achieve sewing mastery. So that is our topic today, and that's a pretty hefty one. Wouldn't you say, Mr. Jim?
You know, I would too, because what happens is that a lot of you sewers, you go along and you've been sewing for quite a length of time. If you hadn't really had, as they say, professional training or studying under somebody, all you're really doing is winging it. What surprises me most in tailoring mastery is that so many of you guys, I do things and people say, wow, I didn't know you could do it that way. Well, my comments always been, I didn't know there was another way of doing it. So I want to show you some of those other ways of doing it. If you hadn't had specific type of training, this will give you an insight on what we tailors do.
Absolutely, and that's a great primer. So this show is going to be chock full of a lot of good, helpful information.
Yeah.
And essentially, just kind of give you an overview of the show, we're going to start off by really defining what sewing mastery is. Then we're going to go on to actually Mr. Jim showing some of his techniques, in a sense, and also pretty much breaking down the fundamentals of sewing, because to his point, and I totally wholeheartedly agree, I've seen him entertain students and work with students. I've worked with students because I like to educate as well, and I see the same kind of problem, is that especially given those that have sewn for a while, you find that they don't do things exactly right. What they end up doing is just repeating the same bad behaviors, bad techniques, and then that's kind of the reason why the garments don't turn out as well as most people like. So we're going to cover that. Then I'll kind of chime in with some practical tips on how to actually put his fundamentals into practice. And then that'll wrap up our show today. But let's just jump right into it. Let's look at sewing mastery, and let's actually talk about it and look at a garment that Mr. Jim has made and kind of define it a little more.
Let's do that.
Okay, so here we are talking about how to achieve sewing mastery. What better way to actually show a master at his best? And this is actually a jacket crafted by Gentleman Jim. And it was a jacket he actually used to showcase at Mimi G's conference in California. But we're actually going to talk about what makes a jacket or any garment look masterfully sewn. So Mr. Jim, take it away and tell us about it.
Well, let's look at one of the most difficult things that people have to make is a jacket.
Yes.
There are a lot of key points that they miss. There are a lot of reasons why they miss. Collars, this area here is very difficult for most people, the way it's set in. A little later on, I'm going to show you how to set them in correctly on the jacket.
Now, let me make a quick plug. If you can't wait till later on, we actually have his entire course on how to make a custom tailored jacket or how to sew it properly. That's actually available. So I'll put that link on the screen. You can get that. But okay, back to you.
All right. So this is one of the key areas that people have. Another area is setting in the sleeve. So you don't get little puckers, so you could get the crown set in right. See, there are elements in this jacket that make it look like that.
Absolutely.
This is what we use in industry, which is what you should use too. The things that go into making that sleeve look just right. Another area of the jacket is the edging. You want to make sure that when you press the jacket, that you get the edging to roll properly, and that you don't get the back side of the jacket to where the edge shows. Now, there are a lot of little key factors that will be shown later on that help this. Then you want to set your pockets in so that they're even on the coat. Because if they're not even, when you button the coat and they don't parallel up, one's higher or lower than the other.
And actually, to even go a step further, you're absolutely right. If your pockets aren't level, but even the bottom of the coat as well, I'm sure you've seen all kinds of crazy stuff that people have sewn where one part of the jacket is lower than the other side. I mean, none of that looks very masterfully done.
It's not. Some people style them that way.
Well,
that's
true.
a whole
that's
different
true.
thing.
That's a whole different
That's a whole different thing, see. But you want to make sure that's right. You want to make sure that you put an interfacing in it so that the jacket stays level. You have a nice crisp edge on it. You don't want it to waver. Tell me about the ones you've seen that waver.
Well, going back to what you're saying and what Mr. Jim's going to cover in the next segment is the fundamentals of sewing. So we don't want to give any of that away, but even looking at the seaming of the jacket. So this is a princess seam jacket. Notice the fluidity and just the nice flow of all the seams. They're straight, they're curved gradually when they need to curve. It's consistent on both sides. One of the biggest telltale signs when something isn't sewn correctly is even looking at the side seams. It's supposed to be perpendicular to the floor. Sometimes you have skewed seams and, sometimes they wave. Now, oftentimes that could be a fitting issue where some people don't compensate for the shapes of a body, where some people are a little bit, they're smaller here and then they get a little bit larger gradually, a little more stout. But if it's sewn right, such as on this mannequin, it should be completely perpendicular. Both sides look great. All the seaming looks really just crisp. So
another area where a lot of people have challenges is the bottom of the sleeve.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make sure that you have an interfacing in that. Mm-hmm. That gives it nice crisp edge. Secondly, you want to be able to secure the lining in the jacket to whereas when you put your arm in the jacket, the lining doesn't fluff out on you. And then you spend time pushing it back up in there.
That's happened to some of us maybe once or twice, and you learn the tips on that. So essentially, we just kind of wanted to show you, Mr. Jim's jacket so you can kind of get a sense of this is the level of mastery I know most sewers actually set out to obtain. This is where we want to go, but oftentimes it's problematic because a lot of sewers don't know the fundamentals on how to actually get to this level. They're looking at this, they're trying to do their best, and every time their output doesn't look like this. So now Mr. Jim is actually going to introduce us to those fundamentals. Now, we don't want to make it seem very, too simplistic or insulting to anyone, but what we want you to do is that always think if you have a problem, go back to the basics. Wouldn't that be right,
That's all
Mr.
it
Jim?
is. Everything is basic. There's a system to everything. Whatever you do, the technique that you use, the system, your step 1, 2, 3, 4, when you lay your foundation down for whatever you make, I don't care what it is, it's a routine of steps that you take. Nothing changes.
That's right.
Nothing changes. So if you get the steps down to whatever it is you're making, jacket, pants, skirt, dress, blouse, whatever it is, if you follow your own, now understand how I said your own, I use steps and systems. I'll introduce those to you guys. Now, that doesn't mean you have to use them. That doesn't mean that my way is totally right. Because what happens is...
You'll want to use his systems, but we'll get into that.
What happens is that once you get it down pat, I tell all my students, think outside the box. You might have a little loop, a little trick yourself that helps you along. The only thing I try and do is I try and get the end justifies the means. How do we do it? To the quickest point. Because in sewing, you could be as clean as this in an hour, or you could be as clean as this in 5 hours. You just want it to be as clean as this. Now, when I say that,
absolutely,
in industry we use a phrase, time is money. Now, it's money not that you get paid for it, but you don't waste the time.
That's right. Especially for those of us that are depending on making sewing as a livelihood, you're absolutely right.
Time is money.
And I do like the fact that Mr. Jim made the point, and this is where we want to change the mindset. There's a sewer out there, and I know you're out there, that you are so frustrated. You've been sewing over and over again. You've been trying garments, and you feel like a failure. You've thrown those wads of those garments in the closet, and probably hid your sewing machine. Please pull everything back out. We are just here to just get you to think differently about construction. If you can get these basics down pat, then you can build everything around it. I will say this, and Mr. Jim and I have had this discussion a lot of times. A lot of things that we do sewing wise, we do for the first time, even as long as we've been sewing, and especially as long as he's been sewing. He will get a lot of projects that are first time, experiences. The trick is, if you have the fundamentals, you can figure out everything else that needs to do. That's just kind of, putting everything in the right order. But if he didn't sew precisely and accurately, which he's going to highlight on how to do that, it would make everything else a problem. So anyway, stay tuned. Let's go to that next segment where we'll meet Mr. Jim at the machine, and he'll talk about the fundamentals of sewing.
All right. All right. Once again, people, you have heard me say 1,000 times, and I'm going to say it 1,000 times more, that the 3 key elements in sewing, which is the technique that you must learn, you must master these, are sewing straight, setting in zippers, and creating pockets. Now, there are several different types of zippers that you set in. I'm going to show you one which was the one that kind of started it all. I'm going to show you pockets, not today, but I'm going to show you today just the zippers, but as I always repeat, sewing straight, setting in zipper, and pockets. Those are the 3 key elements. When you master these 3 things, everything else you do in sewing is just wrapping something around those 3 things. That's all it is. That's all it is. But you must master those. That's why I push all of my students so hard in getting these things down pat. Now, from that, I'm going to show you some key elements. You guys hear me talking about perfecting your straight stitching. This is an exercise that was taught to me over 50 years ago. I still use it. What I start with first is line paper. The key to it is getting it lined up. Now, when you first start practicing, unthread your machine, take your bobbin out. Just get in the habit of rowing it. I'm going to leave the thread in so you'll see what I'm talking about. Once you've done several pages where you're stitching on the line, then get a piece of blank paper, starting on an edge and connecting the presser foot with the next edge, row it that way, without a line. Create you a line. But what you're doing is you're learning how to sew straight. And the easiest way is to start by, like I say, sewing on the line. That's what you want to get. Okay. Now with line paper, as you see, it's easy because you're following in the line. When you do not have line paper, you're following an edge. So if I were to edge this, what I'm doing now is I'm keeping the edge of the presser foot on the existing stitch. If I had unlined paper, I would do it the same way. What I would do is I would create me a line, to start, and then I would lay my presser foot next to the existing line to create the second line. Now this is the exercise that I start all my students with. Those that say, oh, I can sew straight, you'd be surprised once they do this exercise. Now let's say, just so you'll understand, the second line was created from the first line. Let's say it didn't have that. You have to now, once you get that down there, you have to train your eye to see a distance in between, if it's not against it. So now we're creating a line without it being next to a line. So now you start judging a distance. It's where your eye has to come into play, to where you'll see. Now if I go over even further, I'm starting to judge this area in here. Okay. Now I'm not looking at the needle anymore. I'm looking at the space in between. And I create a line, as you see, that's even. If I drew a ruler, it'd be straight and the distance would be the same. This is the exercise that you start with. Now, I was blessed to have a young lady start her lessons with me yesterday. This is the first time she did this. And she created her parallel lining. When she finished these, and don't do one and think you have it. You don't. Then I have them do what I call boxed in. That's where you start creating, stopping at your corners and creating it in. See? Now in this area here, she got off a little. This was her first time doing it. She started out great here. Do I hold this against her? No. Because like I'm saying, this was her first time doing it. Then I had her do a circle. As I said, a circle or a curve is still a straight line. And coming around, starting from here, she got it going in. These are exercises to help you improve on your getting it straight. Now, when you start sewing, understand, see her edging? How it meets up? When you start sewing, you cannot sew and look at just the top side when you hold it down. You have to look at the underneath side, so that if you see it here and you're stitching, well, you don't know what the other one's doing. So you can't stitch here and think you have it. You have to make sure that you're stitching and you're not looking at this edge and this one is off right here. You've always got to make sure that these run parallel with each other when you sew. This is a mistake that a lot of people make. They just look at the top side and not the underside. So that's your exercise to get you sewing straight. Now I always talk about zippers. Setting in zippers. Always close the bottom. Some people don't close the bottom, they want to close it later. Well, if you don't close it, sometimes your stitch, one is here, but the closure is there. Or the closure is here, and the zipper is set in there. I use, on all zipper seams, not a half an inch, not 5/8 of an inch, I use 3/4. And I use 3/4 for a reason. 3/4 you'll always catch the zippers. Some people line the zipper up on the edge and go for it from there. They just put it on the edge. But you don't know how wide your seam is. I do mine and I teach. There comes a point where you don't have to do this. You'll just be that good. And that too will come. Once I've sewn that, then I press the other edge down. Now I tell all of my students, when you're learning how to set a zipper in, the easiest way for you to learn is to baste one edge of the zipper down. Now basting is a method that we use in tailoring to, in turn, hold something in place temporarily. Now, you could use pins, but pins don't always get it, because unless you use 1,000 pins, the time it takes to put too many pins in, you could just baste one edge in, because most people try and pin this way, where they put the pin in this way. Well, the presser foot gets in your way. Some pin it this way. Well, now you got to put a lot of pins in to hold it down. So you got to put a pin there, pin there, pin there to hold it down. If you baste it, that's a temporary stitch. We got a piece of thread here. If you baste your zipper in place, and you really only need to do one edge. You get the little fuzz off there. A lot of times you're trying to put the needle in, but you got that fuzz on it. What I always do is, once I get it down, I put it up against an area where I could see the hole more definedly. See? Now, this is another little thing that I showed my student yesterday. She said she had never seen it. It's how I make a knot. Moisten the tip of my fingers. I take the thread, I wrap it around once here, and I just roll it down. There's my knot. Now, in setting in my zipper, what I'm going to do is, and this is just one side of the zipper, I'm going to take the zipper and I'm going to baste it in place. Remember, like I say, that's a temporary stitch. But what I want to see is, I want to see that I'm a little less than 1/4 of an inch from the edge. You want to make sure that in doing that, that you stay parallel with that stitch you put in all the way down. Not halfway, not 3/4 of the way, all the way down. Notice once again that I have kept the edge of the zipper and the edge of the garment to where that's an even stitch. Don't override it to where it comes too close. Don't go in reverse to where you get too much edge. Just make sure. Now, notice how I'm holding this down. I could pin it down like that, but why pin it and baste it? You see how I'm grabbed it? See how I keep it in my fingers? And I just go on down with my basting. Like I say, the base stitch is just a temporary stitch holding it in place. Now, this is what I mean when I said you only have to do one edge, because when I start sewing this down, you'll understand why you only need to do one side. Now, if you feel comfortable doing both sides, do it. Do it for your own satisfaction. But I'm going to show you how easy it is by just doing one side. I'm going to take the needle out. Now I have that one side. Now I'm going to make my top stitch. Now I'm going to use 1/2 inch on this side. So as you can see, on my machine I have the numbers. Some machines are flat. If it's flat, then there are other ways of marking it. and I'm going to stitch it down. And like I say, if you baste it down, don't worry about if you roll over your basting. That's a temporary stitch anyway. And I'm going to get it down. This is where a lot of people have a problem. They stitch too far down onto the zipper head. So when you get down to almost where your seam is closed, zip your zipper up so you get past that area and continue your stitch. This is the opening right here. That's where you want to stop it. A lot of times people will sew one side down and then they'll start at the top again and sew down. Well, sometimes when you do that, you don't get these even. You'll get a little pucker in there. So the easiest way is to come down, cross over, because this is where it closes anyway. Cross over. And go back up. Now, let's go back up. When you go back up, you don't get a gap there. Alrighty. And this is what happens. You now go up. Now, once again, I'm looking at the distance in between the edge and the edge of the other side of the zipper. Once again, when I get up where the zipper slide is, move the slide out the way. So that now, as you see, the zipper sets in and everything meets up. There's no pucker down here. You can follow the seam quite naturally. If I was sewing this, which is yellow, and I used a yellow thread, you wouldn't be able to see the stitch. I use odd colors so that you can see how that sat in. That's basically the easiest way. No pin, one little basting stitch that comes out, like I say, that's a temporary stitch that comes out. And once it comes out, your zipper is set in. Now my student did some yesterday, and she was just amazed on how easy that was. Because most of the time, if you don't set it in right, you have to do what? Take it out, set it in again. This is one type of zipper. There's 4 different types that we use in today's world. We use this lap over zipper. We use an invisible zipper. We make a fly zipper, which is put usually in pants. And nowadays, they're putting the zippers on the outside of the garment. I will have available for you guys a whole series of how we set each zipper in, including the one that sits on the outside, which kind of looks like that. But there's a trick to it. The trick is usually always at the bottom where people make their biggest mistakes. That, my friends, is the method that we use in industry. I don't know how you've been doing it, and I'm not saying that your way is wrong. This is just an easier way.
Hey everybody. To follow up with the exceptional training that Mr. Jim just gave in regarding the fundamentals of sewing, I want to offer some practical tips. Now again, we don't want to make this seem insulting or, too simple, but the fundamentals and actually getting those under your belt correctly actually do determine where your sewing goes. So I have some practical tips that'll make it easier, because I know a lot of you have sewn and it's been a bit of a struggle to actually sew straight, and you think you're doing everything or you're utilizing all the methods and kind of techniques but it's still a little difficult. Well, let me just offer some insight. First off, definitely do the drills. If you do take the paper test, as Mr. Jim mentioned, if you take it and you find that your lines are a bit skewed, I definitely recommend going in and practice. This should be a drill for you, so to speak. And I mean, even if it means you have to do it for 30 minutes a day, an hour a day, do it until you're accurate. I had an AP English teacher in high school whose mantra was perfect practice makes perfect. And I know most of us know the saying, practice makes perfect, but it's actually true that if you actually implement the right techniques and you do those repeatedly, then you'll get good results. So that's what this is. So again, this is for the person, the people who have struggled with sewing and haven't actually gotten the optimal results you want. We're encouraging you going right back to the foundations and the basics, and this is a great test. If you do decide to do drills with paper, again, 30 minutes a day, a couple times a day or even once a day, and just do that throughout the week, you'll find that you'll pick up on it and you'll get really good quickly. Another way to ensure that you get straight seams is oftentimes we depend on the seam gauge plates on our machines. Of course, this is an industrial machine, and I have an industrial and a home machine, like your conventional sewing machine. And sometimes some are actually equipped with adequate plates with, lines drawn at the 1/8 inch mark, 1/4 inch. Some, is very prominent, is easy to see, such as with this industrial where you do have a longer line. And there are other plates where it's a bit inadequate, where you might have a short little line that marks each seam allowance increment. In those cases, and actually with my own machine, I prefer to use additional okay, so support. I have two easy little tools you can use to actually help you sew straight. Very simple, very easy. One in which I love is actually a magnetic seam gauge, and I'm sure most of you might have one, or you might have seen one before. Maybe some of you haven't. Essentially, it's just a piece of metal with a line on it and a magnet, and it's kind of a raised edge. So you essentially just place it at the appropriate seam distance from your presser foot, and then when you run your fabric up against it, and that kind of serves as a border and ensures that you sew straight. So this is a really great and easy way to maintain straight seam sewing. I use this all the time. I don't have a problem doing that. I'm pretty good by eye, but I love having the additional support. But again, it is magnetized, so I would caution you against using these on your computerized machines. That's not a good thing. Magnets and computers don't work well together. So this would be great for just your plain metal mechanical machines. An additional easy, very practical method, couldn't be more simple, is colored tape. So what I like to do is take, you choose a color with, I'm not even paying attention to anything. I'm just really looking at the edge of the tape. So I tend to take it and just put it where I want it to go, the distance of my seam allowance, and then just tape down. And I run it extra long. So if you have a really flat bed, you can do that. And then again, that serves as a great guide, not only for when you start sewing with material, but also where it finishes, and that ensures you keep a straight edge. So we have drills, we have some support. Now, if you find that you sew straight with paper, and then you also, you sew very well with basic fabrics such as cottons, the ones that kind of have more of a controlled weave. It's easy to sew like a muslin or any type of cotton. But if you find you're straight with them, but when you venture to using other fabrics, you have problems, well then you can kind of consider that a level of graduation. That is the uniqueness of sewing. Every time you sew with something different, oftentimes you have to change and tweak your methods. So for that, I usually recommend just, if you're struggling in that area and you can't figure out why, definitely cop some really great resources on how to sew with different types of fabric. Here's Sandra Zina's more fabric savvy book. I love this one by Claire Schaefer. It's a sewing fabric guide, and essentially it lists all the types of fabric and exactly like the type of needles to use, what type of stitches to use. All those actually play a major part in sewing straight. And in addition to that, consider the settings on your machine as well, and the type of fabric you're using. If your presser foot pressure is too heavy, and you go to sew and it creates drag, of course that's going to impede your ability to sew straight. If your feed dogs aren't feeding correctly, and or if you take off sewing and you're using something lightweight and it just zooms through the machine, of course it's kind of hard to guide fabric with a runaway machine, so to speak. So think about that as well. These are all practical tips to help you with sewing straight. And then one last thing is also to consider your eye-hand coordination. For a lot of people, again, I've worked with students, Mr. Jim have worked with students. Some people, for some, it's easy to kind of glance and look at their eyes and feed fabric through, and it's not a problem. And others have a hard time with coordinating what they see with what their hand movements are. For that, only practice will help you get through a lot of those hurdles. So definitely feel free to just continue your drills. Don't think of this as like a setback. If you find you aren't sewing as straight as you like, stop sewing all your projects, because that's usually the downfall of a lot of sewers. They think, oh, well, this project didn't turn out right. Let me just go on to the next project and sew it, and go to the next project and sew it. And they'll find they get subpar results with every single project. Whenever you encounter a problem in sewing, my recommendation is stop where you're at. I've had to do it many a time, and then just try to figure out that problem. Again, if it's seam work isn't straight and everything looks a little bit off, well then just focus on that entirely and perfecting that, and then
Okay, so we've talked about techniques you can use to actually sew better. Okay, so again, Mr. Jim covered the various exercises you could use to sew better. And of course, I touched on just different tools you can use as well. Well, let's think about dexterity and how it relates to sewing. And of course, dexterity is just a level of skill and grace to perform tasks with one's hands. And it involves great eye-hand coordination. So right now we're looking here at this industrial strength sewing machine, and I'm going to kind of give a little bit more insight into what I mean when I talk about dexterity. So it really isn't all about, knowing what you have to do. Of course, it's about actually executing it. And a lot of times it's a real big difficulty for some people. And I think that's a lot to do with kind of a lack of dexterity. And that's, hang in there. It's not such a bad thing. It's a skill that definitely can be developed. It's no different than someone in the sports arena, or a professional athlete, or even an unprofessional one that's trying to get good at a skill. You got to think, pitchers probably weren't throwing the best curveballs initially, but they developed that kind of skill set to be able to do so. And as a sewer, you can do that as well. So again, it can be improved about. But what I want to kind of change the sewer's mindset is to think about first what you need to do before you actually begin sewing. A good part of sewing is preparation and doing that properly, and then execution. So I'd like to focus on what you're actually going to be working with, which of course is fabric. You're going to be sewing that, and you want to think about what the outcome is, how it's going to respond, all of that. I like to think of sewing as kind of like driving a car. So you literally will be steering the fabric. So I have a piece of muslin here, or muslin, and of course it's a cotton, so it's a lot easier to sew than most fabrics, but you still have to steer it. So just like if you were behind the wheel, you're moving your, the steering wheel, you do the same with the fabric. If you go around a curve, you'll navigate a curve. If you're going straight, you'll push it straight. And then if you need to stop, then of course, like when you're driving, you know where the brakes are. Same with your sewing machine. You know how to kind of get your foot off the gas. A lot of that, again, is just motor control skills and being able to do all of those simultaneously, thinking in advance what needs to be done, and then just really, I wouldn't even say flawlessly executing, just kind of cautiously and skillfully executing those tasks. So here, of course, and this thing is whisper quiet, so I'm going to turn it on. This is our industrial sewing machine. I'm just going to lift the foot up. And so I think a lot about sewing correctly is hand placement. And, you know, how do you feel comfortable? I know a lot of people that feed fabric will do this. Some sewers will kind of do this. They'll push this way. I think you should find what works best for you and then do that. And oftentimes it does take a little bit of time to figure out exactly what that is. But, so let's just practice a little bit of sewing. So there you see that. My hand control. It's funny, I was teaching a student recently, and she would just like hold down on the fabric. She was young, so it's not a problem, but a lot of it is just being very comfortable. I know I don't have to apply a lot of weight to this. I can kind of just steer. If this was something a little bit more lightweight, like a chiffon or something, of course, and I won't sew this because this is part of our giveaway. It's really beautiful sheer chiffon. There'd be a whole different set of rules to actually sewing this fabric. I mean, not only would I look at the machine settings and make sure there's enough pressure, foot weight, but not too much that is dragging the fabric. I look at all those parameters, but then even my hand control would be totally different. I might grip a little bit different, or I might feed a little bit different, sew a little bit slower. So I think sometimes for some of us, we're so used to getting in there and stepping on the gas and just going like berserk. And in all cases, that really does not work. So you find that you can sew some things fairly well, and then other things not so much. It kind of looks butchered. So that's definitely something to think about. So pretty much that's dexterity. Just get very comfortable with sewing. Of course, cottons and things of that nature are a lot easier to start with. So, you know, once you do your exercise, you feel very comfortable. Or even if you've been sewing for a long time and you want to go back to the drawing board on this, you do some of the exercises, just double check to make sure those fundamentals are in check. Then, you know, of course, you can practice on fabric anytime and that kind of thing. But I really do believe, and so does Gentleman Jim, that if you're really struggling or having some major issues, I think if you just kind of back things up and put it into park and just really think some of these strategies we talked about and actually implement them, I think you'll find that you'll pinpoint exactly what the problem is and you'll be able to move forward and get out of that slump and go ahead. So never a bad thing to kind of put the sewing in park and figure out issues. Trust me, it just happens. Okay, I hope this was pretty much a helpful little demonstration on just kind of the way we maneuver and manipulate fabric and the importance of that, and just being able to have good eye-hand coordination. And if you notice that you don't have a skill in that level, you can definitely develop it. And one last suggestion is that you can do different dexterity, I think they call them like exercises, you know, eye-hand coordinating exercises, dexterity exercises, where you know you can exercise your thumbs and do different things to kind of give you a little bit more flexibility and get you ready, because we want to gear up to sew.
Again, these are just some practical tips. Hopefully they will help you out and help you achieve the level of sewing mastery that you seek. Hey everybody, hopefully you enjoyed today's session. Did you really?
I sure did.
I did as well. I think it was really great, the information we covered and how we got the fundamentals on our belt. For those of you that had them or just need a little bit reminder, I think definitely Gentleman Jim stepped up and gave us some really good foundational information. So hopefully you enjoyed it. To close out our show, just want to do a little bit of housekeeping, some little quick reminders. Don't forget, we are having our giveaway. Our show is still new. We're giving away tons of stuff. Remember, a lot of videos, all this other good stuff, fabric. Please go to the Tailor and the Dressmaker Facebook page to actually see the giveaway entry rules. What else? Let's see. We got giveaways. I'm sorry, my brain just kind of went a little spastic there. Is anything else you can think of?
Remember, we're going to give away a grand prize of a sewing machine.
That's right.
You got to stay tuned to get the announcement on when that's going to be and how you enter. It's not about, if you win one of our preliminary prizes, you could still win that. Don't think that you could just win a prize and that eliminates you.
That's right, and I'm happy you mentioned that. So we originally said September 10th was the full giveaway, including the sewing machine. Well, we know a lot of new people are coming on board, so scratch that for the sewing machine. We're going to actually lengthen that giveaway to give enough people a chance to actually enter that drawing.
Yeah, we want everybody to have a chance.
That's right. I'm putting my name in the hat. No, I'm joking. I won't do that. Sorry. Okay.
That's right. You're ineligible.
Dang it. That's what happens when you're the host of a show. So that's going to go down. And then in addition to that, we have had some requests for Mr. Jim's autobiography. So what I will tell you, and I'm sorry we didn't mention before, a lot of Mr. Jim's resources are available right now. I will put the link on the screen. He has a Gumroad account where you can go and get his autobiography, his DVDs, some of his online sewing courses. So keep that in mind. And, go ahead.
Let me say something about the book that I wrote is about growing up in New York City. It's about growing up and how I got into the garment industry. It kind of ends with the Apollo Theater part of my life, which shaped me into who I am. Dealing with a lot of famous characters, a lot of famous artists, professional athletes, motivational people that were around. It basically deals with my communication with them. It shaped and it molded myself into the Gentleman Jim factor. The Gentleman Jim factor, I tell people, is not a cute name. I earned that name. The book tells my part of my life on how I got to that. Now the name Gentleman Jim was given to me when I lived in New York, but I didn't use it until I moved to Atlanta, Georgia. But it's a shaping of what made me want to get into the clothing industry and how I got to start. No more, just gives you an insight on what New York was like during the 50s and the 60s when I was growing up there. Personally, when I look back at what I wrote in here, I'm really at awe of myself on the people that I met and the conversations and the camaraderie of people and just a down-to-earth description of how it was like living in New York during that time. So this is not a complete chapter. This is a chapter in my life. It's not a complete story. It's only about my New York life. You can get it, like we say, on one of our sites. Thank you.
And yes, this is an exciting chapter in his life. So I have the book, so please definitely copy yours if you like it. Lastly, our next episode deals with, and drum roll please, sewing coats. 'Tis the season, right?
'Tis the season.
Now, we live in Savannah, Georgia. It's a little bit warm here, and it'll probably be warm until December. But for some of you all across this wonderful land and world, it is going to start getting cold fairly soon. Episode 3 deals with the ins and outs of sewing coats, tips, strategies, all of that. So stay tuned. Lastly, don't forget to follow us on social media, the Tailor and the Dressmaker. You can go to YouTube, look under James McFarland or the Tailor and the Dressmaker to subscribe to future episodes. And I think that's it. I'm very full and excited from today's episode. It was really great. See you guys next time. You have a wonderful week and happy sewing to you.
Many blessings to all of you sewers and the rest of the world.
Bye-bye.
Bye.